There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday evening, a shared pizza, a quiet lull in a conversation. They wear the camouflage of the mundane, and it is only in retrospect, when you trace the fault lines of your own history, that you see them for what they were. The pivot points, the hinges upon which the door to the rest of your life swung open. For me, that moment smelled of cardboard and cooling pepperoni, and it was shaped by a question so audacious, so casually destructive, that it vibrated in the air between us long after the sound had faded. It was the moment Julian, my best friend, the fixed point in my chaotic orbit, looked at me from his end of the sofa, his expression a placid sea over untold depths, and dismantled the world I had so carefully built. He had been watching me talk about my upcoming date, a nervous, rambling monologue about a guy named Mark from a gallery opening. I was picking at a loose thread on my jeans, cataloging my anxieties aloud, as if naming them might rob them of their power. What to wear, what to say, the terrifying prospect of that awkward end-of-night lean-in. Julian listened with an unnerving stillness, his head tilted. The television murmured in the background, casting shifting blue light across his face, carving new shadows and hollows into the features I knew better than my own. When I finally ran out of steam, the silence that followed was dense, heavier than it should have been. "You're overthinking the kiss," he said, his voice a low counterpoint to the television's canned laughter. I gave a short, humorless laugh. "Easy for you to say. You're a natural. I'm more of a carefully planned, architecturally unsound disaster when it comes to first kisses." He didn't smile. The blue light caught in his eyes, and for a second, they looked like deep water. He pushed the pizza box to the floor and shifted, turning his body to face me fully on the worn corduroy of the couch. The space between us, once a comfortable, neutral territory, suddenly felt charged, a magnetic field humming with an energy I couldn't name. It was the same energy that had been building between us for months, a subtle pressure change in the atmosphere of our friendship, a storm gathering far off the coast that I had been pretending not to see. "Then practice," he said. The word was so simple, so logical, and yet it landed in the quiet room like a detonator. I must have looked at him, my confusion a blank mask, because he elaborated, his gaze unwavering. "Practice kissing me, so you're ready for your date." And there it was. The ordinary Tuesday, the shared pizza, the quiet lull, all of it stripped away to reveal the hinge. A proposition cloaked in the guise of friendly assistance. An offer that was either the most profound act of platonic support I had ever witnessed, or something else entirely. Something terrifying. Something I had wanted for so long I had buried the desire under layers of pragmatism and fear, burying it so deep I could almost pretend it wasn't there. In that moment, with his eyes holding mine, I understood that whatever I did next, the foundation of our friendship, the one solid thing in my life, had just been fractured. The only question was whether it would be a hairline crack we could repair, or a seismic event that would bring the whole structure down around us. To understand the weight of that question, you have to understand Julian. We met in the way that feels like fate, but was probably just algorithmic luck, assigned as roommates in our first year of university. I was quiet, an aspiring photographer who saw the world as a series of potential compositions, of light and shadow. I lived behind a lens, more comfortable observing than participating. Julian was the opposite. He was a force of nature, a competitive swimmer with a laugh that could fill a stadium and a restless energy that kept him in constant motion. He was studying computer science, a world of logic and order, yet he lived his life with a beautiful, chaotic spontaneity that I found both baffling and intoxicating. He was sunshine, and I was the quiet shade of a darkroom. Our friendship shouldn't have worked, but it did. It was forged in late-night study sessions fueled by cheap coffee, in shared anxieties about exams, in the mutual discovery of a city that was too big and too loud for two kids from small towns. He would burst into our room, smelling of chlorine and victory, and dump his wet gear on the floor, talking a mile a minute about his lap times. I would be hunched over a tray of developing fluid, watching an image slowly emerge from the ether, and he would fall silent, mesmerized by the quiet magic of it. He drew me out of my shell, and I, in turn, offered him a space of stillness, a place where the constant pressure to perform, to be on, could be momentarily suspended. We became each other's anchor. My feelings for him were a slow-developing photograph. At first, there was nothing, just the blank paper of our burgeoning friendship. Then, faint lines began to appear, ghost-like and indistinct. It was the way he'd fall asleep on the couch with his head in my lap while I was reading, a silent, trusting wait that made my breath catch. It was the way he'd bring me a coffee, remembering exactly how I took it without ever having been told. It was the fierce, protective glare he shot at a guy who made a dismissive comment about my art at a student exhibition. These were small things, tiny silver halide crystals darkening with exposure. Until one day, I looked at the image and saw it clearly. It wasn't just friendship. It was a deep, abiding love that had woven itself into the very fabric of my being. And I did what any rational, terrified person would do. I said nothing. I packed the feeling away in a light-proof box and stored it in the darkest corner of my heart. Our friendship was too precious, too vital. Julian was effortlessly, unthinkingly straight. He dated a succession of bright, bubbly girls who seemed to be cut from the same cloth as him, all sunshine and easy laughter. I became the confidant, the shoulder to cry on during breakups, the best friend who offered movie nights and junk food as a cure for a broken heart. Each time, it was a quiet agony, a fresh layer of salt on a wound he never knew he was inflicting. But I played my part, because the alternative, a world without Julian in it, was unthinkable. My love for him was a silent, one-sided covenant. I would have him in my life as a friend, and that would have to be enough. It was a fragile peace, but it was a peace I had learned to live in. We moved into an apartment together after graduation, a natural, unspoken progression. He got a demanding job as a software consultant, and I scraped by with freelance photography gigs and a part-time job at a camera shop. Our lives diverged professionally, but our home was the constant. It was our sanctuary, the place where the outside world fell away. Our routines were as comfortable as the worn-out sofa in our living room. My mornings were quiet, spent in the soft light of dawn, editing photos. His were a frantic rush of protein shakes and hurried goodbyes. But our evenings belonged to each other. We'd cook together, or order in, and collapse on the couch, sharing the day's triumphs and frustrations. It was a domesticity so profound, so married in its rhythms, that sometimes I would forget the lie I was living. I would catch myself watching him, the way his brow furrowed in concentration when he was trying to fix a bug in his code, the way he absent-mindedly ran a hand through his hair, and the ache in my chest would be a physical thing, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. I built walls around my heart, not of brick, but of glass. I could see out. I could observe him, love him, but he couldn't see in. I kept myself busy, dated occasionally, creating a plausible narrative of a life moving forward. These dates were hollow exercises, ghosts of relationships I performed for an audience of one, hoping to convince both Julian and myself that I was fine, that I wasn't waiting, that our friendship was truly, genuinely, all I needed. It was a lie, of course. A beautiful, painful, necessary lie. A photograph of a life that looked real, but was only a two-dimensional representation of the truth. And I lived with that lie for years, perfecting the art of quiet observation, of loving from a safe, unbreachable distance. The shift began, as these things often do, with an ending. Julian's relationship with Chloe, a 2-year affair that everyone, including me, had assumed was heading towards something permanent, imploded. It was not a dramatic, fiery crash, but a slow, grinding dissolution. She wanted to move to another city for a job. He was rooted here. The arguments became more frequent, the silences between them longer. I witnessed it from the periphery, a silent observer to the slow erosion of their shared future. When it finally ended, Julian didn't explode. He imploded. He came home one night, dropped his keys on the counter with a clatter that sounded too loud in the quiet apartment, and stood in the doorway of the kitchen where I was making dinner. He didn't have to say anything. The exhaustion was etched into every line of his body. It was a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. It was the profound exhaustion of a soul that had been fighting a losing battle. He looked hollowed out, as if someone had scooped out all the light and energy that was so quintessentially him and left only the shell. "It's over," was all he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. That night, he didn't want to talk. He just wanted to be. He sat on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, and I sat with him, the space between us a silent testament to years of friendship. I didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. I just offered my presence, a quiet anchor in his storm. In the past, his breakups had been loud affairs, full of angry phone calls and nights out with his swim team friends to drink it away. This was different. This was a quiet collapse. The usual armor of bravado and easy confidence was gone, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerability in him that he had never let show before. It was raw and unsettling, and it stirred a protective instinct in me so fierce it almost choked me. That night was the first time the old rules began to bend. After hours of silence, as the city lights began to paint patterns on the ceiling, he finally stirred. He didn't get up to go to his own bed. Instead, he just sort of listed sideways. His head came to rest on my shoulder, a dead weight of exhaustion and defeat. My entire body went rigid. It was a simple gesture, one born of pure fatigue, devoid of any intent other than finding the nearest soft surface. But for me, it was a cataclysm. I could feel the warmth of his skin through my t-shirt, smell the faint scent of his shampoo, feel the soft tickle of his hair against my neck. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my heart hammering against my ribs, every nerve ending screaming. I forced myself to breathe, to remain still, to be the solid, unmoving friend he needed me to be. I was a statue pretending not to feel the sculptor's touch. He fell asleep like that, his breathing evening out into a soft, rhythmic whisper against my collarbone. I didn't move for hours, not even when my arm went numb and my neck began to cramp. I was terrified that the slightest shift would break the spell, that he would wake up and realize the impropriety of it, pulling away with an apology that would somehow be worse than an accusation. So I stayed, a sentinel in the dark, guarding his sleep and my own treacherous, hopeful heart. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, I finally, carefully, eased him back against the cushions and retreated to my own room, my body aching but my mind reeling. A boundary had been crossed, not by force, but by a slow, tired lean. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that we could never quite go back. That night became the blueprint for a new, unspoken ritual. The couch, once a place for casual cohabitation, transformed into a space of ambiguous intimacy. It didn't happen every night, but it happened enough to become a pattern, a new rhythm in the quiet song of our life together. Julian would come home from work, drained and silent, and after a mostly wordless dinner, we would migrate to the living room. The pretense of watching a movie or a show would be there, a flimsy cover for what we were both seeking. He needed comfort, a human presence that demanded nothing of him. I, in my quiet, painful hope, was more than willing to provide it. The progression was gradual, a tide slowly creeping up a beach. It started with his head on my shoulder. Then, a week or so later, he stretched out, laying his head in my lap as I read a book. I remember the first time he did it, how my fingers froze on the page, how the words blurred into meaningless shapes. His hair was soft under my hand, and after a long, internal battle, I gave in to the overwhelming urge to touch it. I rested my palm on his head, a gesture I hoped could be interpreted as brotherly, as comforting. He sighed, a deep, contented sound that vibrated through my legs and settled deep in my chest, and I felt something in me both settle and shatter. He was trusting me with his exhaustion, his sadness, and I was holding it, cradling it, while my own heart was a chaotic symphony of longing and fear. Each night was an exercise in hyper-awareness. I became a scholar of his smallest gestures. I learned the rhythm of his breathing as he fell asleep, the way his fingers would sometimes twitch and curl against my leg. I knew the exact weight of him, the specific warmth that seeped through my jeans. My world, which I had always experienced through the detached frame of a camera lens, suddenly became intensely tactile, overwhelmingly sensory. The universe shrank to the dimensions of our worn-out sofa, to the space occupied by our two bodies. I would sit for hours in the dim light, my own exhaustion a distant hum, and simply exist in that proximity, memorizing the feeling of him, banking these moments like a miser hoarding gold. I was living in a liminal space, a doorway between friendship and something I dared not name. It was both exquisite torture and a profound, quiet joy. Part of me, the pragmatic, self-protective part, screamed that I was a fool, that I was misinterpreting everything, that he was just leaning on his best friend in a time of crisis, and I was weaving a romantic fantasy out of his grief and my own desperate loneliness. He was the unknowing initiator, acting out of a need for comfort that was entirely platonic in his mind. I was the quiet observer, cataloging every detail and assigning it a meaning it probably didn't possess. I was building a house of cards on a foundation of grief, and I knew it was destined to collapse. But another part of me, the hopeful, foolish, photographic part, couldn't help but see the composition differently. I saw the way he would sometimes look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, a strange, searching expression in his eyes. I saw the way he started to leave the door to his bedroom ajar at night, a departure from his usual habit of closing it firmly. It was a sliver of an invitation, a crack in the wall he kept around himself. It probably meant nothing. It was probably just forgetfulness, a symptom of his distraction. But in my world of light and shadow, of subtle signs and hidden meanings, an open door was a powerful symbol. It was an offering of vulnerability. It was a space left for someone else to enter. This ritual, this nightly tableau on the couch, became our new normal. It was a fragile ecosystem of unspoken needs and unacknowledged feelings. He needed a safe harbor, and I provided it. I needed a sliver of hope to survive on, and he, unknowingly, gave it to me. We were two people healing in the same space, but we were healing from entirely different wounds. His was a fresh, visible gash from a love that had ended. Mine was an old, internal ache from a love that had never been allowed to begin. And so we sat in the quiet darkness, night after night, him sleeping and me watching, both of us pretending that what we were doing was simple, that it was just friendship, that it wasn't the most complicated and beautiful and dangerous thing I had ever known. It was into this fragile, charged atmosphere that the idea of Mark, my date, was introduced. My friends, concerned by my own deepening quietness, had pushed me back into the world. They set me up with him, a kind, intelligent architect who shared my appreciation for brutalist architecture and quiet galleries. On paper, he was perfect. In reality, he was a ghost, a placeholder. But I agreed to the date, partly to appease my friends, and partly as a desperate act of self-preservation. I needed to prove to myself that I could still function in the real world, outside the gravitational pull of Julian. I needed to remember what it felt like to be desired by someone who wasn't asleep in my lap. I told Julian about the date casually, trying to make it sound like a trivial thing. We were in the kitchen, him leaning against the counter while I made coffee. I watched his face for a reaction, a flicker of something, anything. But his expression was unreadable, a smooth, placid mask. "That's great, Leo," he said, his voice even. "You deserve to get out. Have fun." It was the perfect, supportive best friend response. It was also a knife twisting in my gut. Of course, he was happy for me. Why wouldn't he be? In his mind, I was his platonic anchor, and it was healthy for me to have my own life, my own romantic prospects. The thought was so logical and so painful, I could barely breathe. The week leading up to the date was strange. The ritual on the couch continued, but the texture of it had changed. There was a new tension in the air, a low hum of something unsaid. Julian seemed quieter, more withdrawn. He would fall asleep in my lap almost instantly, as if desperate for the oblivion of sleep. I, in turn, felt a growing sense of guilt, of infidelity. It was absurd. I was going on a single date with a man I barely knew, and I felt like I was betraying Julian, who was, by every official measure, just my friend. The lines had become so blurred, the unspoken rules so convoluted, that I no longer knew how to navigate the space between us. Then came that Tuesday evening, the night before my date with Mark. We ordered a pizza, the ultimate comfort food, and settled onto the couch. The movie we put on was just background noise. I was a mess of nerves, and my anxiety spilled out of me in a torrent of words. I talked about Mark, about the restaurant, about my fear of awkward silences, my deep-seated insecurity that I was fundamentally uninteresting. Julian listened, his gaze fixed on my face, his own silence a stark contrast to my babbling. He seemed to be absorbing my anxiety, drawing it into himself. And that's when he did it. When I finally wound down, he let the silence stretch, let it become a tangible thing. He pushed the pizza box away, turned his body towards me, and dismantled my world with 5 simple words. Practice kissing me. So you're ready. The air left my lungs. The sounds of the television, the city outside, my own heartbeat. It all faded into a distant roar. All that existed was his face, illuminated by the flickering screen, and his eyes, which were no longer placid. They were dark, intense, and filled with something I had never seen before. It wasn't pity. It wasn't simple friendship. It was a raw, unguarded emotion that mirrored the chaos in my own chest. He had taken my greatest, most secret fantasy and spoken it aloud, dressing it up as a joke, a helping hand, a practice session. My mind raced, searching for the right response, the safe response. I should laugh it off, make a joke, tell him he was ridiculous. That was the smart thing to do. That was the way to preserve the fragile peace. But my heart, that foolish, traitorous organ, was screaming a different word. Yes, the silence stretched. It was a chasm opening between us, and I was standing on the edge, terrified of falling, but even more terrified of backing away. Julian, I started, my voice a dry whisper. I didn't know what I was going to say next. I didn't have a plan. He didn't let me finish. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that belied the frantic energy he usually carried. He closed the remaining distance between us on the couch. The world narrowed to the scent of his laundry detergent, the faint warmth radiating from his skin. His hand came up, not to touch my face, but to hover in the space beside it, a gesture of profound hesitation. It was a question, a silent request for permission. My entire life, I had been the observer, the one behind the camera. For the first time, I was the subject, held in the focus of his intense gaze. Is it okay? He whispered, and the sound was so fragile, so unlike him, that it shattered the last of my defenses. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't casual. This was something real, something vulnerable, and he was just as terrified as I was. I couldn't find the words to answer him, so I just nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement. But it was enough. It was consent. It was surrender. The first touch was impossibly gentle. His thumb brushed against my cheekbone, a feather-light stroke that sent a jolt of electricity through my entire system. He was mapping my face, it seemed, learning its geography in the dim, blue light. His eyes searched mine, looking for any sign of retreat, any hint of fear. And then he leaned in. It was the slowest kiss in the history of the world. A deliberate, agonizingly tender approach. I closed my eyes, unable to watch it happen, able to do nothing but feel. His lips met mine. There was no pressure, no demand. It was just a soft, warm presence. A question. For a moment, we just stayed like that, motionless, two people breathing the same air, our mouths barely touching. It was tentative. It was reverent. It was nothing like practice. Then he sighed, a soft, shaky exhale against my lips, and deepened the kiss. And my world, the one I had so carefully curated and protected, fell away. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss I had sometimes imagined in my loneliest moments. It was slow and deep and searching. It was a conversation without words, a story being told in the dark. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me there, not with force, but with a sense of desperate need. I brought my own hands up to his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart under my palms. It was racing as fast as mine. Time ceased to exist. There was only the couch, the blue light, and the feeling of his mouth on mine. He tasted of salt and pizza, and something that was just him, a taste I felt I had been waiting my entire life to know. Every rational thought I had ever had, every wall I had ever built, turned to dust. There was no mark. There was no date. There was no practice. There was only Julian, and this impossible, earth-shattering reality. He was kissing me, and I was kissing him back. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We didn't move away. Our foreheads rested together, our eyes still closed. The silence that filled the room now was different. It was not empty. It was full. It was charged with the truth of what had just happened, a truth so enormous it felt like it had a physical weight. I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and unsteady. "Practice," he murmured, his voice thick, and it sounded like an apology, a question, and a prayer all at once. I opened my eyes. He was so close, his lashes dark against his skin. I could see the confusion warring with the desire in his expression. He had initiated this. He had crossed the line, but I could see that he had no idea what to do now that he was on the other side. He had opened a door and was terrified of the room he had just stepped into. Some practice, I managed to say, my voice hoarse. He pulled back then, just a few inches, but it felt like a mile. The connection was broken. He looked at me, his eyes wide, and for the first time that night, I saw fear. He scrambled for the casual mask he wore so well, but it wouldn't fit right. It was crooked, ill-fitting. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was deeply unsettled. "Yeah, well," he said, attempting a laugh that came out as a strangled cough. "Just wanted to make sure you were ready. For Mark." He said the name like a talisman, a magic word to ward off the reality of what we had just done. He was trying to put the moment back in its box, to label it as friendly assistance, to restore the old boundaries he himself had just obliterated. And the pain of that, the sudden, cold splash of reality, was sharper than anything I had ever felt. He had given me everything I ever wanted for a few timeless minutes, and now he was trying to take it back, to pretend it meant nothing. He stood up abruptly, creating a void on the couch where his warmth had been. "I'm beat," he said, not looking at me. Gonna turn in, he walked towards his bedroom, his movements stiff and unnatural. He didn't say goodnight. He just disappeared down the hall. And this time, I heard the soft, definitive click of his bedroom door closing all the way. The open invitation was gone. The door was shut. The ritual was broken. I was left alone in the blue, flickering light, the ghost of his kiss on my lips, my heart a ruin in my chest. I had been given a glimpse of heaven, and then unceremoniously cast out. The hinge had swung, not into a new room, but into a cold, empty hallway. Sleep was an impossibility. I sat on the couch for hours, replaying the kiss, replaying the aftermath, dissecting every word, every gesture, trying to make sense of the emotional whiplash. The tenderness of the kiss felt real, undeniable. The panic in his eyes afterwards felt just as real. It was as if two different Julians were at war inside him. The one who acted on a deep, unspoken impulse, and the one who was terrified of the consequences. He had reached for me out of some profound need, and then, upon realizing what he had done, had recoiled in fear. The next morning, the apartment was thick with a silence that was entirely new. It wasn't the comfortable, easy silence we were used to. It was a brittle, anxious silence, full of unspoken words and averted gazes. He was up before me, which was rare. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already dressed for work, staring into a cup of coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. He mumbled a morning without looking at me. The easy camaraderie that had defined our lives was gone, replaced by the stilted awkwardness of strangers. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and demand an explanation. What was that last night? Did it mean anything to you? Or was I just a convenient experiment? But I said nothing. The quiet observer in me took over, falling back on old habits of self-protection. I made my own coffee, my movements slow and deliberate, the silence stretching between us like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. He left for work with a clipped, "Have a good day," and the click of the front door shutting behind him felt like a judgment. The entire day was a fog. I tried to edit photos, but the faces on the screen were just blurs. All I could see was Julian's face in the blue light. All I could feel was the memory of his lips. I was supposed to be getting ready for my date with Mark, supposed to be feeling nervous and excited. Instead, I felt hollowed out, grieving for a relationship I never even had. The practice kiss hadn't prepared me for my date. It had annihilated the very possibility of it. How could I sit across from a kind, well-meaning stranger and pretend to be present, pretend to be interested, when every cell in my body was screaming Julian's name? My phone buzzed late in the afternoon. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, my heart sinking with a strange premonition. "Hey Leo, it's Mark. Got a weird call a little while ago from your roommate, Julian. He said you weren't feeling well and that we should probably reschedule our date for tonight. Just wanted to check in and make sure you're okay. Hope it's nothing serious." I read the text once, then a second time, then a third. The words swam before my eyes, rearranging themselves into a new, shocking truth. He had canceled my date. Julian, who had claimed he was just helping me practice, who had fled from what we did, who couldn't even look me in the eye this morning, had gone behind my back and actively sabotaged my date. The audacity of it, the sheer, possessive, contradictory nature of the act, was staggering. The hollow feeling in my chest was instantly replaced by a white-hot surge of anger. It was an anger born of hurt and confusion, but it was anger nonetheless. It was the anger of someone who had been toyed with, whose feelings had been used and then discarded. He didn't get to do that. He didn't get to kiss me like he meant it and then act like I was a stranger. He didn't get to shut me out and then secretly control my life. The glass walls I had built around my heart didn't just crack, they exploded. For the first time in our entire friendship, my patience, my quiet understanding, was gone. I was done observing. It was time to act. The hours until he came home were the longest of my life. I paced the apartment, a caged animal, the angry energy thrumming through me. I composed 100 different opening lines in my head, from furious accusations to wounded questions. By the time I heard his keys in the lock, my anger had cooled, solidified into a hard, calm resolve. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't live in the ambiguity anymore. I needed the truth, whatever it was. He walked in, looking just as tired as he had the day before. He dropped his bag by the door and started to head straight for his room, clearly intending to avoid me. Julian. My voice was quiet, but it stopped him in his tracks. He froze, his back to me. He didn't turn around. We need to talk, I said, the words feeling heavy and foreign in my mouth. He finally turned, slowly. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed. He looked like a man preparing for a verdict. Leo, he started, his voice trailing off. Why did you cancel my date? I asked, holding up my phone with Mark's text displayed on the screen. I kept my voice steady level. I would not let him see how much this had torn me apart. A flicker of something, guilt, panic, crossed his face. He had the decency to look ashamed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the floor somewhere to my left. I don't know, he mumbled. It was stupid. I'm sorry. No, I said, taking a step closer. The hard-won calm was starting to fray. That's not good enough. You don't get to do what you did last night, and then do this today, and tell me you don't know why. You owe me an explanation. You owe me the truth. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were glistening. The sight of his unshed tears almost broke my resolve, but I held firm. I can't, he whispered, his voice cracking. I can't explain it because I don't understand it. Then try. I pushed, my voice softer now, but no less insistent. Try, Julian. Because I'm lost here. Last night, that kiss, was that just a game to you? Was it practice? Or was it real? The question hung in the air between us, the ultimate truth I needed to hear. His carefully constructed composure finally crumbled. He sank onto the edge of the couch, the same couch where our world had tilted on its axis just 24 hours earlier. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Of course it was real, he said, his voice muffled by his hands. God, Leo, of course it was. He looked up at me, his face a mess of confusion and despair. I think I've been wanting to do that for months, maybe years. I never let myself see it. You were Leo, my best friend, the one solid thing. And I was so terrified of breaking it, of ruining the one good thing in my life. He took a shuddering breath, the confession tumbling out of him now, a torrent held back for too long. After Chloe and I ended, everything was a mess. The only time I felt okay, the only time my head was quiet, was when I was here, with you, on this couch. And I told myself it was just because you were my friend, that I just needed comfort. But it was more than that. And last night, when you were talking about your date, I felt this thing in my chest. It was ugly. It was jealousy. And it was so strong I couldn't breathe. And I thought if I kissed you, I could get it out of my system. That I could prove to myself it was nothing. Just a stupid, fleeting impulse. He gave a wet, broken laugh. But it wasn't. It was the opposite. The second I kissed you, it was like everything clicked into place. Like a photograph coming into focus. And it terrified me. Because it means everything has to change. And I don't know how to do that. I don't want to lose you, Leo. I'm so scared I'm going to lose you. He was looking at me now with a raw, desperate vulnerability that mirrored my own. All the anger drained out of me, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He wasn't a monster who had been playing with me. He was just a man who was as lost and terrified as I was. He was the unknowing initiator who had finally frighteningly, become knowing. And he was scared. I crossed the remaining space between us and sat down beside him on the couch. I didn't say anything. I just took his hand. His fingers were cold, and they laced with mine, clinging to me like a drowning man to a life raft. We sat there in silence, our hands clasped between us, the truth finally laid bare in the quiet of our living room. It was messy and scary and uncertain, but it was real. The house of cards had collapsed, but we were both still there, sitting in the rubble. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new from the ruins. Something stronger. Something honest. The days that followed were a delicate dance of renegotiation. The confession had shattered the old dynamic, but a new one had not yet formed in its place. We were tentative with each other, like two people learning a new language. The easy, unthinking physicality was gone, replaced by a self-conscious awareness of every touch, every glance. A hand brushing against another as we reached for the same coffee mug became a moment of charged significance. We were navigating a new emotional landscape without a map. The couch became a neutral territory again, for a time. We would sit on opposite ends, the space between us a symbol of our uncertainty. The silence was no longer brittle with unsaid things, but it was heavy with the weight of things that had been said. Julian's confession replayed in my mind constantly. He was scared. He didn't want to lose me. It was both a comfort and a terror. A comfort because his feelings were real, a mirror of my own. A terror because his fear was a powerful force, one that could still drive him to retreat, to rebuild the walls he had momentarily let down. I knew I had to be patient. For years, I had been the patient one, the quiet observer. Now, that skill was more crucial than ever. He had taken the first, terrifying step of admitting his feelings. It was my turn to create a space where those feelings could exist without pressure. I didn't push. I didn't ask for labels or definitions of what we were now. I simply went back to being his friend, but a new kind of friend. A friend who knew the truth. We started talking. Really talking, for the first time. Not just about our days, or movies, or his work, but about us. We talked about his fear, about my years of silence. I told him about the photograph in my heart, the one that had been slowly developing all this time. I told him about the agony of watching him with other people, about the quiet joy of our nights on the couch. I laid my own vulnerability bare, offering it to him as a gesture of trust. And he, in turn, began to unpack his own confusion. He spoke of a long unacknowledged loneliness, a feeling that even in his past relationships, some essential part of him was unseen. He said that with me, he felt a sense of peace, of being truly known, that he had never experienced before. He had just always labeled it friendship because it was the only label that made sense, the only one that wasn't terrifying. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to build a new foundation. It was a foundation made of honesty, of whispered conversations late into the night. The physical distance between us began to shrink again, but this time, it was intentional. One evening, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, he looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I answered with a small nod, and he moved closer, bridging the gap. He didn't put his head in my lap. Instead, he just rested his head on my shoulder, just as he had that first night after his breakup. But this time, it was different. It wasn't a gesture of unconscious need. It was a conscious choice. I leaned my own head against his, and we just sat there, breathing together in the quiet. There was no pretense of a movie. There was no ambiguity. It was just us. The first kiss after the confession was as tentative as the first one had been. It happened a week later, in the kitchen. I was making tea, and he came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. My hand stilled. I leaned back into his embrace, my heart doing a slow, happy flip. He was warm and solid behind me. After a long moment, I turned in his arms to face him. He looked down at me, his expression soft and open. "Can I?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," I breathed. And he kissed me. It was a gentle, reassuring kiss. It was a promise. It was an apology for his fear and a testament to his courage. It was the beginning of our new language, a language of touch that was honest and open, with no need for the camouflage of practice. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together. The open door, once a symbol of his unknowing invitation, became a symbol of our shared life. We no longer needed the pretense of exhaustion or nightmares to find comfort in each other's presence. We chose it. We built a new kind of domesticity, one that was not an imitation of a partnership, but the real thing. It was in the simple acts, his hand finding mine as we fell asleep, me bringing him coffee in the morning, the way we now moved around each other in our small apartment, our bodies orbiting not out of habit, but out of a deep, gravitational pull of love and acceptance. There is a concept in photography called the decisive moment. It's that fleeting fraction of a second when an image is at its most powerful, when all the elements of form, content, and emotion align perfectly. For years, I had thought of my life with Julian as a series of missed moments, of photographs never taken. But I was wrong. Our story wasn't about a single decisive moment. It was about the slow, patient process of development. It was about letting the image emerge from the darkness, chemical by chemical, truth by truth. The practice kiss was not the picture itself, but the flash that illuminated everything, forcing us to see what had been there all along, hidden in the shadows. The real art, the real love, was in what we did next, stepping into the light, together, and choosing not just to see the picture, but to live inside it. We had found our way out of the empty hallway and into a room filled with a quiet, steady light. A room we had built together. A place we could finally, truly, call home.